I'd like to welcome all those on Zoom with us tonight and those present to our preparation classes for this week. Tonight is going to be on how to maintain your weapons and clean your weapons. But before we start, we're going to have a word of prayer, and we've asked Fred Davies to give that prayer for us.
Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful to have Thy help and Thy blessings. We are grateful to have the expertise here to help and train how to take care of firearms. We pray for Thy Spirit to be with us, that we'll gain comfort in that, that we'll accept and understand the strength and blessing it is to be confident in what we do. And we pray for Thy Spirit to guide us in this. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 Good evening. I'm going to give a demonstration on the Armalite rifle, or what is commonly known as the AR rifle, for disassembly, cleaning, reassembly, and a function check. Wanted to start off by explaining something about cleaners. The Army, the military, the DoD, in the early 90s decided to go to a one-size-fits-all cleaning, lubricating, and protectant called CLP, or break-free, that was used predominantly throughout the military. They found out in Iraq, if you remember the experience of Jessica Lynch in the 507th Maintenance Company in May of 2003, her unit was ambushed in Iraq, and almost everyone in the company's rifles jammed and were unable to return fire. And of course, Jessica Lynch ended up dealing with several other soldiers being captured and later released after several days when the war was over. And the Army went and did an investigation as to what happened with the rifles in that unit. It was not very well publicized, but what they learned was that the break-free in the rifles basically absorbed all the sand and dust in the air and caused the rifles to jam. So the Army realized that break-free was not a good use for that, and soldiers started coming up with alternatives on their own. One of the things that was advertised shortly after that is a product that I came across called Militech, which is a synthetic-based metal conditioner that was highly recommended by several federal agencies for lubricating weapons. And I went and mail ordered this while in Iraq and passed it around to everyone in my unit to fill up with small bottles to use on their weapons. Because we're going to be working with solvents, it is recommended, if you choose, to wear some kind of protective gloves for yourself to protect your hands so you don't absorb any of the harmful chemicals that you'll be working with. These might be my wife's gloves. Now, some of you probably have come across these, which can be quite handy for assembly and disassembly for your AR. It gives you a breakdown of all the parts and pieces. I thought this was outstanding and very useful. However, I found that when I actually used it and started putting the pieces of my rifle down, because many of the pieces are black, they blended in with this and you couldn't really find them. So, based on that, my recommendation is, while this is a great reference, find the whitest towel or sheet that you have, the cleanest thing, like this one, and use this as a protector for your tabletop or whatever you're using when you clean your rifle. So here's a typical Armalite style rifle, AR-15. This is not mine, I borrowed this from a friend. To begin with disassembly, before you do anything with any firearm that you have, if it's handed to you from someone else, you want to make sure, first, 3 basic rules. Always keep a firearm pointed in a safe direction. Today we're going to point all our firearms this way towards the wall, away from everybody. Second, you want to make sure that it's unloaded. And ideally, if you are the one handing a firearm to someone, you should unload it in front of them, let them see it, hand it to them and say it's unloaded, and then let them do the same thing so that they can verify for themselves that it's unloaded. And then thirdly, never point a firearm at anything you don't want to destroy. So to start with this, with basically any firearm, the first thing you do is remove the source of ammunition, which is usually a magazine. So magazine release, take the magazine out, set it aside. Then we need to open the bolt to ensure that there's no round in the chamber or the breech. Since we're keeping it this way, I have to flip it upside down. Pull the, what's this called again?
Charging handle.
The charging handle, thank you. Pull the charging handle back, look down into the breech to ensure that there's no round in the chamber. Ideally, if there is a round in there, when you pull the charging handle back, the round will pop out anyway. Once you've confirmed that, you're good. Slide has to go back forward again. You have your disassembly, your takedown pins. You've got one in the back of the lower receiver, one in the front of the lower receiver. And your rifle basically breaks down into three major parts. You've got your upper receiver, your lower receiver, and what we're about to see when you remove, well, it doesn't remove, when you open the receiver pin, the locking pin, the rifle will open up. Pull your charging handle again, and it will pull the third part out. This is known as the bolt carrier group, or as some people refer to it as the BCG. You can then remove your charging handle. In the lower receiver, you have your trigger housing with your trigger group. As far as for cleaning and disassembly, there's no need to do anything with this to remove it from the weapon. It can stay in there. You have also your recoil buffer and buffer spring. I will show you this. There's a small detent that holds the buffer in place. Press it down, and your buffer will pop out. Your recoil spring will come out. Usually, I don't bother with this. It may get a little dirt on it, as you can see on my glove here already, but it doesn't really do anything to affect the operation of the weapon. There isn't that much dirt that gets in it. What you can do is just with a dry rag that you use for cleaning is just wipe it off. And that's sufficient for that. Same thing with your buffer itself. Just wipe it off and that's good. And then you can put it back inside the housing. Slide it in, put your buffer in, and then push it in past the detent. And it should lock in place. And that's all you have to do with that. The next thing I do is your BCG, your bolt carrier group, is usually what gets the most dirt when firing the AR. One of the best things that I've learned for cleaning your bolt carrier group is a very easy product you find at Home Depot or anywhere else, is Lacquer Thinner. And this works very well on metal. It strips off all the dirt, all the carbon buildup, and when you remove it, when you take the metal parts out, it evaporates and it leaves no residue. So that comes pretty recommended. Basically what I do is I have a pint-sized wide mouth jar and I put about 2/3 of it in. And this is where you'd like to have gloves because this stuff can be pretty toxic. So you try not to get any on you. You disassemble your bolt carrier group. The first thing you have is your firing pin retaining pin on the left side of the BCG. And usually with a fingernail, you may be able to pull it out like that. And you can see it's just a small cotter pin like that. And then as I take each piece out, I just drop it in the jar and let it simmer. You tap the back of your bolt carrier group and your firing pin should fall out. And I drop that in with the pin portion sticking up and the base of the firing pin in the solution. On the top, on the front of your BCG, underneath your key is the firing pin, the bolt retaining pin. This has to be turned 90 degrees because it's shaped like a rectangle to get past the bolt key, and it should slide right out. It should. Yeah, just like that. And you see it has a small hole in it. That's where the firing pin goes through when it's inside the carrier group. Drop that in. Then your bolt can be removed from the bolt carrier. Bolt carrier is just one solid piece, and I drop it in, key first, let it soak. The smallest portion you have now is your bolt that has your extractor on it and your extractor retaining pin, which is the smallest piece that you have to worry about. The other thing that I get when I'm using this lacquer thinner as a cleaner is a nice big set of tweezers to retrieve stuff out of it so you're not sticking your hands down inside it. So for this, what I use the tip of your firing pin, press down on the back portion of your extractor. There's a small spring inside, which you'll see when it comes apart. So it has some give there. You'll see it moves back and forth. You push down, take the pressure off the pin, and with the tip of the firing pin, you can slide out the retaining pin. And if you're lucky, it'll slide right out. And you see, if you can see this, this is a very small piece. This is the smallest piece in the AR that you need to be concerned about. So you don't lose, you can see it's just sliding right off my glove. You gotta be very careful with it. So that's the piece you wanna make sure you don't lose track of. I drop that in the jar. I drop the bolt in the jar, but I do not drop the extractor in the jar. And the reason for that is usually around the extractor spring, or inside in this case, you might be able to see a small little piece of red in there. This is rubber, and you don't want your lacquer thinner to dissolve that rubber. This is to help the spring and the recoil of the extractor to work properly to extract the shell when it pops out of the bolt and is ejected from the rifle. So basically all I do is, so everything in the bolt carrier group is inside the jar. I've got the extractor, I hold it by the spring, and I just dip it in a little bit, the top half of it, to clean that. And then you take your rag and just wipe it off and set it aside. Now, while everything else is soaking, the only thing that really needs to be done to the rest of your rifle is to clean the bore. Put your firing pin back in, let it soak some more. Now, it used to be, kind of like with CLP, that you'd have a bore rod and you would run rifle bore cleaner through back and forth, patches and patches, 20 or 30 patches until they come out clean, get all the black out, and then you would run light coat of oil through it to preserve it, or like we had before, we would be doing all that with CLP, and you could easily spend a half hour just trying to clean your bore out. A new invention makes it so much easier. A device called a bore snake, which is basically flexible. It's made of very sturdy cloth with two brass ends on each end. It's narrow on one end, and the portion on the back end is fitted to the caliber of the weapon. And they come in all different calibers. This is the one for 22 rifles, or basically anything that shoots a 22, from a long rifle to an AR-223 5.56 millimeter. This is one for a 9 millimeter. So basically, for every caliber of rifle you own, you should have a bore snake to match with it. These make it really handy because all you have to do is put a little cleaner on the portion of the bore snake where it thickens up to fit the caliber of the barrel. Just like that. Run the narrow end through your bore. And then just pull it out the other side. You're done. That bore snake does all the cleaning in one swipe. What can take 10, 15 minutes now takes 5 seconds.
What was the spray?
Thank you for asking. One of the things that I had a friend of mine recommend is something else, nothing fancy, you don't have to have, expensive, from Home Depot. This is called PB Blaster, penetrating oil. And this is what he recommended to use on bores. Just spray a little in and run your bore snake through and you're done. And it'll clean everything out.
How often do you clean the bore snake?
You don't. There's nothing really to clean on.
So PB Blaster has multiple uses. It is the best.
Yes.
It is the best thing in the world for freeing frozen bolts. I mean, that's
Pretty much, yeah.
there's nothing better than forgetting WD-40. This stuff is.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned WD-40. Along with CLP, one of the things that is not recommended to use on firearms is WD-40. It does not do what it needs to do. It's great for breaking free rusted hinges and locks, but it's not good on firearms.
It's
It
not as
doesn't,
good as PB Blaster. PB
Yeah.
Blaster is superb.
and WD-40 is too light to use as a lubricant in a firearm. It evaporates too quickly and it doesn't provide the lubrication that a firearm needs. So that is not recommended to use. In addition to your cleaning rag, I also recommend having in a container an oily rag to wipe down parts to give them an oil covered sheen as a protectant when you reassemble everything. And then to keep it from evaporating, keep it in an airtight container. So basically we go backwards from what we have mixing away in our jar here. We take our bolt carrier group out and we want to wipe it down, remove any of the residue, and whatever is left on is going to evaporate within a minute and leave no residue. But what you're doing is basically cleaning off any of the powder residue from the cartridges that have been fired through it. A couple other things to have handy: a regular toothbrush and a brass brush for cleaning anything that has serious residue on it that even perhaps the lacquer thinner may not be getting off. In this case, this rifle has actually already been cleaned, so it shouldn't have much on it to begin with, but these are other tools that are handy to have. In this case, with the bolt carrier group, where the bolt goes inside the end, it's handy to have a pipe cleaner or Q-tips, and you can run it around inside the base to clean out any residue. As you can see, it goes in there pretty far back there, and you can see there's a little bit of residue back there. It doesn't have to be 100% white clean, but it is good to wipe out any major residue that's in there. And with it soaking in the lacquer thinner, it should come right off easily. So that's your second part. You've got, remember your extractor itself. We already cleaned that because we didn't drop it into the lacquer thinner. Got our bolt carrier group. So the next part is our bolt. Each piece, as we take it out, we wipe it down. The biggest piece, the biggest issue with the bolt, this is usually the part that gets the dirtiest when you clean it. It tends to get a lot of carbon buildup right around this upper lip here, where you have your locking rings, your, no, they're not locking rings. These are the,
Gas rings.
the gas rings, thank you, yes. These gas rings. There used to be, in the Marine Corps especially, they used to say you have to make sure that the gaps in the gas rings don't line up. After extensive testing, we learned that doesn't really matter. You don't need to worry about that. So, but with the buildup of the carbon residue on here, even with a brass brush, it can be very difficult to get that off. So as a cheat, what I've discovered, what I've started using is a Dremel tool with a steel brush on it, or not necessarily steel, but a soft metal brush on it. And I just run it along there and it takes all the carbon right out of there. And it cleans it in like a minute, as opposed to brushing and brushing and brushing for 10 minutes and still not getting it off. That makes it a lot easier.
That's a great hack.
Yeah, it's a really good hack.
It saves time.
So once you have your bolt out, you need to put your extractor back on. So you need your extractor pin. That's the very tiny pin, your smallest piece. So you got to dig around in here until you can find it. If your jar has a lot of residue in it, it may not be as easy to find it, but you know it's in there somewhere. And this is where the long tweezers come in handy. There, I got it and I dropped it. So I know it's there. There we go. So I want to be careful not to lose that, of course. Really easy to clean, it's very small. So basically, reverse order, you take your extractor and you press down on that spring and you slide your extractor pin through the hole and wiggle it all back and forth until it all lines up again. And you should have your spring working in there. This is where you like to get some of your lubricant, whatever type you want to use. It can be Militech. Hops number 9 is also highly recommended. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a great set of products to use. Whatever you feel is best for you, just be aware that your break-free CLP and WD-40 are definitely not recommended. So what I have here is I have a smaller bottle that I put some Militech in. And so in the middle of the bolt, there is a ring around it that stands out a little bit more than the rest of the surface of the bolt. This is the part that is in contact with the inside of the bolt carrier group. So what I like to do is put a little layer of lubricant on that when I put that back. And then you twist it around a little bit, back and forth a little bit, make sure it's got good lubricant. Now, notice here in your bolt, you have the hole where your bolt key goes in. That key will only go in one way. So that's your next part. I'm going to leave that there for now. We'll get the bolt key out. That's the bolt key. I'm going to dry it off. Now to show you what it looks like on the inside, it's going to go in like this, and then you're going to twist it 90 degrees so you can put your firing pin through. Now, you'll notice the extractor is here on the top portion at an angle. If you switch it around the other way where the extractor is on the other side, the bolt key will not fit in. That lets you know you've got it backwards. It's tapered on the back end so that you can't get this wrong. So if it doesn't go in, you know you need to twist your bolt 180 degrees to get the right aperture in there to fit it in. So you put your bolt in, and if it shows up on the camera, you can see in there, you've got your extractor here on the right side. You've got your hole on the left side. You have to make sure you've got it on the long side adjacent to your bolt key. It slides in just like that, and then you have to twist it 90 degrees. It's like that. And then, before you put your firing pin in, that will be the next step. You want to pull the bolt forward. And what some people do is you can slap it forward as well. So you want to make sure it stays at 90 degrees so that that hole inside the bolt key lines up for your firing pin. So that's ready. Next step is we take the firing pin out. Dry it off. The firing pin is critical also, and this one you can actually see a little bit of it. This is another point here on this base at the back end of the firing pin where a lot of carbon residue will build up. And the same thing again, I take my Dremel tool and I just slide it around that and get all the residue off of that till that's nice and shiny. Then, because you've got these two openings here on either side of your bolt carrier, I put my thumb on the back end, fingers on the front end, so that your firing pin won't fall out either side. Hold it face down and just drop the firing pin in, and it should go all the way through. You should see the base of the firing pin basically align with the back end of where it goes into the bolt carrier group. And if you look, when you push the bolt back in, you should see the tip of the firing pin emerging from the hole in the middle of the bolt. And that way you know it works. And it should slide back and forth freely. Now, the last one you need to complete your carrier group is your firing pin retaining pin, this little cotter pin that keeps the firing pin from falling out. This also goes in only one way. You've got a large hole on the left side of the bolt and a very tiny one on the right side of the bolt where the tip of the cotter pin goes through. So you can only put it in from left to right, and you may have to twist it and wiggle it to get the ends of the cotter pin to come through to the other side, but you should be able to see it there on the other side, and that prevents your firing pin from falling back out again. Now your bolt carrier group is complete and ready to go back in. The only other thing that may be of issue with your lower receiver, in addition to cleaning the recoil spring in your buffer, is your trigger group, your trigger housing. And because you don't take any of these parts out, basically you can take your toothbrush and you can just brush out any type of dust or dirt that may be in there. You can also, if you're going to pull the trigger without anything in front of your hammer, you want to hold it back with your finger. You don't want the hammer to fly forward on its own. If you do that often enough, you're going to end up prematurely breaking your hammer. So put your finger on the front of the hammer, pull the trigger to release it, and then let it come forward, and you can get inside the back part of the trigger housing and just basically clean out anything. If you have compressed air, this is a great place to use that as well. You can spray compressed air in there and try to blow out any dirt or dust that might be in there. Usually trigger housings don't have much issues with them. Then you want to reset your hammer, just press it back down again until it seats. You want to replace your charging handle, thank you. This ends up probably being one of the most frustrating things for people to do when they're reassembling an AR. On your charging handle, you have two very small wings that stick out on the edge on each side towards the front of the charging handle. Inside your upper receiver, where the charging handle slides, there are two indentations on each side that align with those two wings. You can't just slide the charging handle right in the top. Those wings will not let it go in. You have to, in the area where the bolt belongs, put your charging handle in and lightly apply pressure upwards until those wings align with those notches and the charging handle slides in its place in the upper portion of the upper receiver. And this takes a little finessing. There it is right there. It slides in. And then you just want to leave it out because you want the key on your bolt carrier group fits up inside the hollow portion of the charging handle. You want to make sure your bolt is forward. Slide it in. The key goes up inside the charging handle, and then the whole thing drops in place. Slap it. You want to make sure that your bolt is, the back of your bolt carrier is flush with the upper receiver, and that your charging handle is locked in place. With that being done, you should be able to just reconnect the upper and lower receiver and push in the locking pin, and you're basically done. Next thing you should do at this point is do what's called a function check. Make sure that everything's assembled and operating properly. To start with, put the weapon on safe. charge it, pull the bolt all the way back and release it. Then you want to test the trigger and make sure the safety works. Pull the trigger and it should not fire because it's on safe. Nothing happening. Next, take your finger back off the trigger, put the weapon on fire, pull the trigger again, and you should hear a nice audible click, meaning that the weapon's working. When you pull the trigger, hold it back to the rear. Don't let go. That's what it should sound like. While you continue to hold it to the rear, the trigger, pull the charging handle back again and release it. Now, you release the trigger and you should hear a duller click. That's the trigger reset. Then you pull the trigger again to make sure the reset functions properly and it should fire as it did before. There you go. That's your function check. You know your weapon's operating and functioning properly. And from this point, we're going to turn it over to our pistol demonstrator.
Very good, great.
And also you want to make sure when you're done with your lacquer thinner jar, reseal it nice and tight because this stuff will evaporate fast and it ain't cheap.
That was a great demo. I really appreciate that.
Last thing I want to state, once you get this sequence down and you practice it a few times, you should be able to clean a rifle in under 10 minutes.
Okay, I've got a couple of different handguns here. One I have, this one is the Sig Sauer P320. This is the one that the Army has gone to in the last couple of years. So this is the one they are now using. And we'll go through how we do that one. Also have a Finic National 45, which is very similar to the Browning. And then a couple of 22s that work a little bit differently. One is a Smith & Wesson, and one is a Ruger Mark III. We'll start with the Sig Sauer P320. First thing I do is make sure that all my weapons are pointed toward the wall so they're in a safe position. And then make sure it's unloaded. Lock it to the rear and remove the magazine. Check the breech. Make sure that there's nothing inside. And it's still locked to the rear. I'm going to have to turn this direction, the opposite direction, in order to take it. The first thing you do is you take off the slide. It's locked to the rear. There's a lever here that you pull down on. And you do it 90 degrees. You push it to the rear, and then you slide it out, and the slide comes directly off. If you're using on some guns that are similar to this, like the 1911, which this one is modeled after the Browning or the Colt 1911 that the Army used before, on that one you have to pull the trigger for the slide to come off. On this one you do not. They've decided to modify that so you don't have to pull the trigger for safety reasons. So the slide comes off. So you have your slide and you have your receiver. That's basically the two parts you have in addition to your magazine. On the slide, you have a spring that comes undone, and you can take the barrel out of the slide portion. You clean it pretty much the same way you did the rifle. You spray it down with whatever you're going to use. With a PB blaster, I like to use, and I probably may switch, but for now I've been using the Butch's board shiner, and I use that to clean it all out with. And I also use a snake In this case, I have a pistol snake rather than a rifle snake, which makes it much shorter. And on this, this is a 9mm, so it's quite a bit thicker because it's a larger size. 9mm or 357 Magnum or 38 Special all uses the same size. It's literally the same size. Then I put a little bit of the bore cleaner. I just drop it down in here. As you can see, I'm using my bare hands on this, so I'll wash them when I get through at the end. So I pick up my barrel, just run it down through. I like the shorter one, pull it through. That's supposed to be equivalent of 450 times of running the rod down it. That's what they advertise it as anyway. Then I wipe everything down. If this were really dirty, I would use the oily bore cleaner to go across the outside of it. Same thing with the spring and the guide rod. Take the slide, I wipe that down. Have you put some of the bore cleaner on that too. Make sure I'm looking for carbon pieces or any parts that are carbon on the shine, because that's the areas that the carbon kind of builds up on. You can see it in there. Clean the whole thing out as much as possible. If it doesn't look like it's coming out, I use a toothbrush to get down into that slide, get a little bit more. And then wipe everything down. On the slide, take the lower receiver group, do the same thing on that. Now there is one more level you can take on the SIGs. The actual pistol is the trigger mechanism in this metal piece here. By pushing a couple other things, and it takes a little bit of work to get it out, you can pop out that. You can see the serial number on the gun is actually on the trigger mechanism. And that is the actual gun, so you can change the hand grip on the lower receiver. Normally you don't disassemble that unless you're actually putting a different one on so that it fits your hand. When the Army sends this out, they send 3 different sizes so that a soldier can pick the one that they want. Once that's wiped down, we reverse it, putting it back the same way. The barrel, guide, I have that backwards. Yes. There we go. Sorry about that. I did have it backwards. So that goes in. At this point, I take the penetration oil or the lubricant. I use Slick 2000. It's supposed to be 2,000 times stronger than regular penetrating oil or lubricating oil. And what I do is I put this on any part that's shiny on the gun for the lubricant, especially along the slides. Slide back in. Lock it to the rear. Re-rotate the lever. Put that back and forth. Get a nice rag to wipe everything down. Lock it to the rear, verifying that works. Check the trigger, make sure that it does not fire. Push it forward. Look at point it toward a safe wall. Use it to fire. Pull it back, go forward again. Hear the click, and then fire it again. And then that's the gun completely put back together again. The Finique Nationale, which is the 45, is done exactly the same way, except this one has both the lock, slide lock, both on both sides, so it's ambidextrous, and it also has one other item on it, which is a decocker. So this one has the hammer, and when you do the decocker, it decocks it without firing it, which is sometimes when you have a hammer where the other gun did not have a hammer, that safely puts it down. And then this also has a safety that I can put up with a decocker going down and then the safety going up. It's exactly the same way on disassembly. The other ones that I have, these two, this is a Smith & Wesson. These are 22s. These work a little bit differently. They don't have a slide. I guess they have a slide, but it's this back part. Again, first thing I do is take out the magazine. On this Smith & Wesson, the magazine release is in the middle of the handle. And then it doesn't have a whole slide that goes forward. It's just the firing mechanism down below. And so I really don't take anything apart. I take a snake. This is a rifle snake for a 22, but it works the same way. And you drop it down through after I run it into the bore cleaner. And it sometimes doesn't like to go.
Matter if you go back to front to back?
That's one thing on all weapons. I always go bore to the end of the barrel because that's the direction the bullet goes. So that's the direction the wear is. And I want it to wear in the same direction. I have seen people that run that bore back and forth, and it has a tendency to round off part of your riflings. And it's always been recommended to me to run it straight through bore to the end. If you have a rod, you take the brush off after it goes through, and then take the rod out and put the brush back on and still run it down from bore to the end of the barrel. If you run the rod up through the barrel, then you put the brush on after it's come through the bore, and then you pull it through. Having a little trouble getting it through the Smith & Wesson. This is the Ruger Mark III. It pretty much works the same way as that, except there's a different way to take out the magazine and then to verify that the magazine on this one is on the side, but the snake goes down the same way, which means there it is. This one came through, work its way through, run it through once, and this is a little bit different snake than the other one. This snake has wire brushes on it on two sides, and then it has a little bit in the middle. I always put my bore cleaner, the bore cleaner before where the brushes are, and then this thicker part on the end can clear it out when we're through. Are there any questions on the pistols? One we don't have today is Glock.
It'll be here in 1 minute.
Okay.
I just asked my neighbor if he could bring his Glock in.
Okay. The Glock is a little different on disassemble of the slide. It's a little bit tricky, and
Yeah.
I have a preference, so I don't care for the Glock. I have lots of friends that have it.
I see an argument on the horizon. One of the things, I had a guy tell me that I trusted pretty much on a gun. He said, what lubricates high-speed reciprocating steel? And I said, well, one, he said, yeah, that's what I use to lubricate. Well, you know, if it works on a engine running at 7,000 RPM, and it probably works on a rifle pretty well too. So I don't know the gunny nut effect.
30-weight motor oil is a fine lubricant for firearms.
There is one thing that I have found in cold environments or in very, very sandy environments. So we're talking Alaska at 70 below zero, or we're talking the desert at 120 above zero, is graphite. Graphite does not collect dust and dirt, and it doesn't freeze. And we have found that, so if I'm in a situation where it really matters whether it functions, I use graphite.
We were doing a winter survival class. We had just lubricated like normal. And at about 25 below, they quit working. At 40 below, they absolutely, they were blocked.
So graphite will continue to work at those temperatures, huh?
Yes, graphite will work at 70 below. I can personally guarantee that.
Does graphite have a tendency to cut at all in your rifling or anything?
You don't put on very much. But the graphite does not freeze at 70 below zero. Now, this is how you have to think of 70 below zero. People think 70 degrees below zero. Well, 70 degrees is 102 degrees below freezing. 102 degrees above freezing would be 32 plus 102. So that would be 134 degrees. Think about 134 degrees. So you're thinking Death Valley, which got to 138 a couple years ago, to 70 below, the opposite direction. And think of everything that can go wrong.
And think of your skin, because at 30 below, it only takes 3 minutes before you can't move your fingers.
At 70 below, you've got about 30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the other thing I'm going to mention is make sure you understand your weapon and how it fires. I've seen a lot of what I call negligent discharges because people haven't checked their weapons out. One example is an M60 machine gun fires from an open bolt position. That means it doesn't fire until there's a bullet in the chamber and the bolt is pulled all the way back and released. If they didn't verify that chamber was cleared and they just slammed that bolt forward, then it fires. And that's another reason to keep your muzzle in a safe direction. And I have had that happen right in front of me by a soldier who thought he was cleaning his rifle or his M60 correctly while he was doing 3 other objects, including doing his laundry, talking on the phone, and a couple other things. When you clean a gun or work with a gun, that should be the only thing you're working on.
I hate it when my M60 misfires.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding there. You have a lot more experience with heavy weapons than I do.
It was a Delta Force guy too.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Oh, that's the end. That's a career ender right there.
No, because we didn't make a big issue of it.
Okay. Can I talk? I'm sorry.
Thank you so much.
Can I speak for a moment?
Come up.
I just wanted to thank these 2 fine gentlemen for their demonstrations tonight. I was scheduled to do this, but had some surgery on my foot last week, and really did not feel comfortable getting up here and doing it. And I got to tell you, they did a far better job than I would, even on my best day. These guys have done far more. They've cleaned far more guns than I even held. Thank you.
So this is a Glock 19. It's a 9mm Glock. I really like this. It's slightly smaller than their full size, so slightly more concealable, but it actually doesn't kick that much. This is actually my wife's gun. She really likes it. So basically, whenever you are breaking it down, of course, magazine out, just make it a little easier. You pull the slide to the rear, and you hold it. First, of course, make sure that there's nothing, no rounds in it. But on the sides here, on both this side and this side, there's a little ambidextrous guy here. You pull down. Okay. So this is why you want to make sure that it's empty. It's because you pull it down and you let the slide go back forward, and then you pull the trigger. But while you pull the trigger, you got to also hold the slider, or else the slide will just fall right off. Kind of tricky. So you hold it back, you pull it down. Probably easier if you actually do it like this, so it's okay if it slides. Whenever you pull the trigger, the slide just slides forward. Okay. So on the bottom part, there's not really too much other than you can clean in here. You can get little Q-tips and clean it all up. There's not really too much more to take apart in the bottom section here. But up on the slide, so you go ahead and pull off the little buffer spring. Okay, and then the barrel will come out the bottom here. And this is dirty. I'm just letting you know it's dirty. I'm sorry. So this is the barrel. It's all by itself. No big deal. In the top, it's not usually user serviceable to take apart where you actually have the pin. You can do that, but most people don't get into that. Sometimes they'll clean everything else, and anything inside where the firing pin is, they have like a gunsmith or something clean that, or take it apart, make sure, mic it out, make sure all the specs are good. But with that, yeah, I wouldn't really want to get into that and taking that all apart. So that's pretty much it as far as disassembly. Any questions on that?
Can you reassemble that slide?
Yeah, of course.
I have trouble with the pulse.
Okay, so you put it back in, barrel goes in, slides in, you just push it back. It kind of fits into a groove as it goes back. Okay, and then you got your little buffer. The side with the hole in it goes out. And it actually fits better going that way. This way it kind of doesn't fit as good. So that goes this guy, and then it fits. Or am I silly? No, I'm silly. It goes opposite. So the nipple end goes into the hole. I haven't done this in a while. Okay, and then whenever you put it onto here, it has to actually fit down into where it's flat. And so it's kind of hard to see, but essentially it has multiple notches on the bottom of the barrel. So you compress it in and push it down. Once you get it down to that bottom notch, it'll hold itself and it'll look flat across. Then when you've got to put it back in, flip it over. You start this side here, there's two little L's that the back of the slide goes into. And then you basically just rack it back and release. So you can make sure it's in place. Lock it to the back with the magazine catch. Any other questions?
Good work.
No? Thank you. Oh, I love Glocks because the safety is your finger. So as long as you trust your finger, you're good. If you don't trust your fingers, you probably have some safeties. Wouldn't be a bad idea. The Marine Corps does not, so I was in the Marines, Marine Corps does not use Glocks because they want you to have a safety. Like they're all about 2 safeties or 3 safeties or 4 safeties on things. The only hard part is and you do a ton of drills, like the Beretta 9mm, a ton of drills. As you raise it, you take the safety off. As you bring it down, you take the safety and you put it back on. Over and over again, so that it's muscle memory. If it's coming up, it's ready to shoot. And when it comes down, it's not, but to me, I really like the Glock because it's just plain to shoot, Okay. Thank you guys. Okay. Appreciate it.